Hi, everybody. This is Liam. I hope that everyone can see me and or hear me. And if you can, please do let me know, us know, because we are very excited to be able to get this thing started. We're going to have a couple more people kind of roll in, but I'd love to hear that everyone can see me and or hear me. Please let us know. And if you are very shy, that's totally cool as well. I'm assuming, Vaishali, you can hear and see and hear me. Just a little bit of, okay, perfect. All right, so I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today. It has been a big one. I was just telling Peter actually before I jumped in here that this is my third webinar of the day, which is kind of insane, but I'm in exactly the right mood to be able to talk because I've been talking for about 3.5 hours, and I think this is like my 7th cup of coffee and or tea. So we're going to be talking about how BPOs adapt and survive and thrive in the new outsourcing landscape, which I think is a really interesting subject. I actually just finished, by the way, this book. I don't know if you know this one, Peter. This is Contact Center Management on Fast Forward. I just got through this book. A little boring, but very, very good book. It's by Brad Cleveland. Yeah,
right.
It's been.
I've not read it, but it's interesting that you've got it. I'll have to pick that up for that explain trip.
I've been reading every single thing that you could possibly think of about the BPO industry because we're going through a big change, and that's why I think it's so interesting to be able to talk about this, bring up this session, talk about this webinar now, because we are probably going through the fastest change in the BPO industry, outsourcing industry that, to be honest with you, I've ever seen in the last 15 years. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce our fantastic speakers. First, we have Peter Ryan, and his name is honestly synonymous with excellence in the customer experience and business process outsourcing field. Brian, I'm kind of reading off a script. I don't know if you put that there or if that's just Vaishali that gave me that script, but I agree with it. You are synonymous with excellence in customer experience and the BPO industry. And Peter's a globally recognized authority in the field. Throughout his illustrious career, he has provided invaluable insights into CX resources, contact center clients, national governments, industry associations. His expertise is strategic matters such as vertical market penetration, service delivery, best practices in technology deployment, and offshore positioning. And he's been instrumental in shaping the industry. Joining Peter, we have Matt Kendall, and he's a seasoned business journalist and founder and managing director of Cognitive Copy with a deep understanding of the BPO, CX, and software development outsourcing industry. Matt's insights and analysis have enlightened many in the industry, offering a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities in the outsourcing domain. Together, Peter and Matt will discuss the BPO landscape, providing you with actionable strategies, to adapt, survive, and thrive in this dynamic and ever changing environment. So, without further ado, let's dive into hopefully a very enriching session and uncover the secrets to succeeding in the new era of outsourcing. Peter, my general question to you, actually, which is a completely separate thing that might kind of crash this entire discussion. Me and Peter have had many discussions about artificial intelligence as it applies to the BPO industry, the outsourcing industry.
Yeah.
Broad perspective, where do you think that space is going, or how do you think that artificial intelligence is going to impact the industry over? And people talk about 5, 10 years. I actually don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the next 18 months. Do you think that there's going to be any significant impact in the next 18 months? And if so, where do you think it's going to come from?
Well, I can speak to the marketing side mostly as a content writer and a researcher and an analyst for the industry. I provide a lot of services to BPOs and software development outsourcers for content, for written content, and just in my experience with AI and the way that it's developing and how rapidly it's developing, I think that all bets are off. Honestly, I think that the growth of AI and the fact that it's getting to a point where it will be able to self-improve.
Mm.
Once it gets to that point, we reach that singularity, and no one really knows what's coming next. And depending on how soon that happens, how quickly that happens, I think every business around the world, and no matter what industry, is going to be impacted by it. So it remains to be seen, really. I think that there is a point in which no one is going to be able to tell what comes next. But talking in the next 18 months,
Mm.
if generative AI continues on the current track of these kind of annual improvements that seem, well, even like month to month improvements, then I'm sure that we're going to see a lot of differences in how businesses are dealing with customers, how they're interacting with customers, how agents are able to tap into deep knowledge bases within each provider's background and their information, and then use that knowledge at a much more agile and rapid pace while
Mhm.
still keeping that human element. I think
I
that's all
was
going to be important.
One of the big things that's happened in the last week is Sam Altman being kicked out of OpenAI and then brought
Yeah.
back in essentially 4 days later. And I just read some pieces, and TechCrunch has actually wrote the piece, which is very scary. That there's a program called QStar
Hmm.
that has been launched, and they have basically said that they've built an AGI, which is a
Yeah.
artificial general
Yeah.
intelligence that essentially can be the averagely intelligent person that you work with. So, like a human being of an IQ of 100 equals this AI, and that was the reason why he was fired, was
Yeah.
because they did not want this AI to get out. They wanted to be able to make sure that they could release it in a much more controlled manner. And
Hmm.
now maybe Sam is going to release this and deploy it, to the world. I just don't know what the implications are of essentially being able to build a million, averagely intelligent coworkers with a snap of the finger instantaneously, how that's going to impact the outsourcing industry. My general perspective is the value chain will just go up. So like we're no longer going to be working on regular tier one customer support tickets anymore. We're going to be working on the tier two, tier three stuff, and
Hmm.
companies are going to be spending a lot more time with clients than they were before. The problems that take up 80% of your time, but those are the ones that are the really important ones. That's kind of the way that the market will theoretically go. But I don't know about your perspective on that. It's terrifying for me to be able to see these things, and terrifying can mean exciting in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's none of us know what's coming next, but it's whether you're going to be excited about that or terrified. But I think like there's some really interesting use cases that could come out of AGI. Like I think in general, society could have access to AI assistants whether we use the smartphone or the next generation of devices for that will be very interesting. And those AI assistants could be applied to, again, any business. And in the contact center industry or any of their clients, they could be providing dedicated AI assistants that are just highly knowledgeable on one specific brand, one specific company. And that could be scary for a lot of the human agents, but at the same time, you need someone to teach these AIs at the beginning. You need someone to direct them and make sure that they're following the right guidelines and protocols.
Right.
You can't just let them loose and expect them to pick it all up, pick up all the slack and be ready.
Yeah.
At least not yet. Maybe that's in another 5 years, but that's coming.
Yeah, I feel that that's a 5 to 10 year trajectory, which if you
Yeah.
think 5 to 10 years, then you think maybe never. There's a lot of these discussions of what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Well, we've been talking about AI that's going to come down the pipe in 5 to 10 years in the BPO industry since I've been in the BPO for the last 15 years, but it's never really come about. I would say probably OpenAI is the only one that's really dented it. But even in that context, what we're seeing internally on our data is no one's really firing their staff because they're replacing them with an AI. And we have hundreds of thousands of users across our network. So it's a pretty clear bet that that's not going to be a bigger problem in the short term. But I am continuously watching it because I think it's so important for our businesses to be on point. Peter, is your mic in a better?
I was just going to see if I could jump in to see if this is any better.
This is great. Yeah.
We can
Okay.
We can thank.
I will
can thank
disappear.
Bose Technology. We can thank Bose Technology. But before you do, Liam, I just wanted to
Yes.
dive in and give my thoughts. I think you raise a very interesting point with Matt about the extent to which, over the course of the past decade and a half, I've been hearing the same rubbish that seems to come on a 2 to 3 year cycle, that this next wave of automation is going to get rid of the first line of contact center agents, or the first line of types of inquiries, whether they're digital or with the telephone, and it's never come to pass. And I'd say up until very recently, especially on the digital side, the automation interfaces are abominable that so many people are dealing with, and are just ending up leading to more telephone calls and to angrier end users. I think we're at a point where, with generative AI, we can reasonably talk about getting rid of some of these human interactions, where it's feasible over the course of the next 12, 18, 24 months to start seeing that migration to automation that's powered by artificial intelligence, that's going to be in a position to remove the frontline human interaction, to change an address or to update a credit card number. This will all be able to be done with the assistance of automated interfaces that will be in a position, through the artificial intelligence motor, for lack of a better term, to actually handle this type of work. So we're very much at a cusp right now, but the onus is going to be on the industry to get it right, to make sure that they've stress tested all the tools that are needed, to make sure that everything is going to be locked down and it's going to be watertight. Because so many times in the past, we have seen interfaces from an automation standpoint that have been deployed incorrectly or half-baked, and that's just led to more problems. So the industry cannot get it wrong this time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that we're probably dealing with an increasingly problematic situation where we don't even know how these AIs are built or how they operate. So, we can just essentially, that black box is getting bigger and bigger. And then your entire business is dependent upon this black box that all of a sudden could become like a Nazi sympathizer. I don't know if you remember Big Blue. They released that on Twitter, the AI, and then within a few hours, it became this like Nazi. It's like, those are things that can happen. There are still points inside of GPT-4 in which the AI just has a quote unquote freak out, and it just starts basically ranting and raving. You don't want that to happen inside of your business. And particularly when that AI has access to all of your customers' credit card information, as an example. It's a really, really big problem. But anyways, I'm sorry to derail your conversation. I'll jump out. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the comments or the Q&A section, and then we can get to it at the end of the presentation.
Great stuff. Well, look, I think that really at this point, Matt, you and I are going to talk a little bit about the Offshore BPO Confidence Index 2023 and take everybody through what the report was all about, how the report came about, and talk a little bit about what some of the key conclusions and some of the key findings were. So if you're ready, we can dive right in.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Look, I think as a way of commencing this discussion for the sake of everybody at Time Doctor and the audience, and we're very much appreciative of the chance to talk about this report. Matt and I, a couple of years ago, came to the conclusion that there was no real report or research that was out there which touched on the ability of an outsourcer to make sure that they were able to drive the best possible outcomes in a particular nearshore or offshore market. And with that in mind, in Matt, I guess it was 2021 now when you and I broached the idea about combining our resources and our skill sets to try and come up with an index or a questionnaire that would lead to an index to provide the readers, whether they're the clients or the BPOs, with an idea about which locations seem to be ticking the right boxes, as well as those that perhaps might have some work to do. So with that in mind, we considered a whole series of different criteria that an outsourcer would be looking at when they would be considering going into a different offshore or nearshore location. And these revolved around several. In fact, Matt, I think that it would be safe to say there were certainly micro level or industry level factors that were important, the extent to which talent was available on the ground, the BPO ecosystem, the extent to which the industry was able to interface with the government as well as individual players with each other. And then there's macro level factors, political stability, economic stability, public security, infrastructure, all sorts of different components that when you put these pieces into the jigsaw puzzle add up, and it all comes down to how attractive, I guess, that puzzle is, the picture is once you put those pictures together.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we stress that the perspective comes from first-hand experiences from BPO executives and operational managers within the locations that we're assessing. So one of the things we wanted to do was eliminate that kind of PR spiel that a lot of companies will put out and give a platform for people who are actually operating on the ground to speak their mind and share their actual truest experiences and opinions on the market. And yeah, I think we achieved it. This is the third year we've been doing it, and we've seen some pretty interesting results over the 3-year period. And every year we're surprised by what comes out.
We are indeed. And to give the audience a bit of a flavor just in terms of how this works, Matt and I devised a fairly comprehensive questionnaire that we ourselves took to make sure that it made sense. We stress tested it with people who were on the ground in different markets to make sure that it was rock solid. And I would say there were probably, Matt, would we be looking in the line of about maybe 80 to 90 different questions that individuals would be required to answer, and they would be required to give answers on the basis of how confident they were, a whole series of different criterion. Now, the rating manner that we did was on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being highly confident, 1 being no confidence, effectively 0, and 2, 3, 4 would denote different levels, varying levels of confidence in between those two polar extremes. Now, once this was done, once individuals once they completed the questionnaire, Matt and I then crunched the numbers over the course of the period of a number of weeks to try and effectively normalize how the data sat on a country by country basis across all the different categories that we were looking at. And that way we were able to come up with this year's confidence index. Now, before we get into what some of the results of the confidence index were, I think it's also important to note, Matt, you and I were quite proud of the fact that we've had our largest response rate ever in 2023. There was a huge amount of interest in terms of in terms of how the questionnaire was completed, the number of different organizations that completed it. And Matt, maybe you can give a little bit of flavor to the types of people that were answering, because I think this microcosm really gave us more of a sense than ever about the extent to which BPO operators on the ground in different countries feel about their respective locations.
Yeah, so within each country, we managed to track down some of the key executives and the operational leaders within the industry, within the core ecosystem, depending on the country. So all of which have extensive experience, not only with living in the country that they're in, but also working within the industry. We had over 200, around 250 more or less people responding. We had to filter some of them out because sometimes you get people who are 100% confident in everything, and obviously that's not accurate. So we needed to kind of check for that kind of information and make sure that it was accurate and fair for each country. So we looked at 17 different delivery markets, and we attracted over 150 BPO organizations, different ones, to answer the questionnaire across the world. Most of which, over 60% of which, have been in operation for 10 years or more. So there was a large sense of experience there. And yeah, I think that in terms of the categories, you've already covered that. So yeah, let me know what you want to cover next.
Well, I think probably what everyone's dying to know, Matt, are the rankings or the levels of confidence. And probably a good way of looking at this would be for you and I to go through maybe all the different countries in maybe the top, middle, and bottom third or quartile, but just to talk a little bit about what some of the key perspectives were we pulled out from each one. And I think that as we look to this index, Matt made a very good point to me this year. We're not saying that one country is better than another. We're not saying that one country is ranked higher than another. What we're doing is we're looking at each of them individually and providing a sense about the level of confidence on a normalized basis that those operating in these countries are facing. It's important to recognize too that before we get into this deep dive, that even those countries that perhaps didn't fare as well as others, there still was a relatively high level of confidence, Matt. I mean, I don't think that we should underscore the fact that there are countries in the index that maybe didn't perform as well as others, but there's still a fair level of investment in each one of these from a BPO and a CX perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Just because one country has got a higher overall confidence than another doesn't mean. I mean, you can find that one of the results will show that the labor market in India, for instance, there's a 94.7% confidence rating. But then you look at other markets and they're all, most of them are above 80, above 85. So everyone is very, very confident in their labor market. I think that's one of the big findings overall, is that there doesn't seem to be any difficulties in sourcing things like frontline quality agents, customer service, tech support, especially in India, but in other places. But there are some differences in some of the other markets where it might be difficult to find things in certain specific skills like social media management or content moderation. But that across the board, everyone seems to be fully confident that finding agents for quality frontline customer service is not really a problem, and that seems like quite an obvious finding, as these are some of the biggest markets in the world for BPO delivery.
Well, let's dive into what some of the results were in terms of the index this year, Matt. And if we talk about perhaps the quartile of countries that achieved a rating of 80% or more, let's take a look at the ones that came in more towards the top of the index. And obviously you've alluded to India, and India was the number one country this year with a confidence rating of 90 0.1%. Now, India has always been a strong contender in the Offshore BPO Confidence Index, and this year it showed itself to be a strong contender, frankly, the top contender once again. Any thoughts about India in terms of how it played out beyond the labor market?
Well, most of the results are positive. So people are just highly confident in their capacity to source almost every type of talent. One of the things that India does struggle with a bit is recruiting foreign talent. But that's, again, it's another common trait within every country. It seems that bringing in people from other countries or hiring people who are only temporary residents is quite difficult across the board. Infrastructure for India is also high, almost 90%, in terms of the internet connectivity, broadband internet. These are all almost 100% across the board. So a very, very strong infrastructure, especially in the metropolitan areas. Commercial property market is high, also 90%, 91%. So there's still plenty of space for BPO facilities and new entrants who want to set up shop. The ecosystem is the lowest scoring for India, though. It's only 83.3%, which is still a high score in general and on average across the global market. But it looks like the BPO ecosystem could be a place that India should be focusing on to improve if it wants to retain its number one ranking next year. Economic stability is also quite interesting because it's the first score in 3 years that's been above 90%. So something's happening over in India where people are highly, highly confident, especially in the BPO industry, highly confident in their economy for the next 12 months. Because no one has ever pulled anything over 90% in 3 years in this report. So I would say that, India's ecosystem could do with a little bit of work, but the economy is still very strong and the talent pool is highly preferable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree 100% with what you've just said. Great assessment. The other thing I would note as we take a look at some of the other countries, the Dominican Republic, the Czech Republic, and Egypt have all achieved a very strong standing this year. And it's interesting that as we look to these countries, obviously, each one of them has got an established BPO ecosystem. They've been doing BPO and CX work for quite some time. When I look at this, Matt, also from the standpoint of one of the fast movers, Egypt actually moved up the rankings in terms of its level of confidence index relative to other countries quite significantly. And this is something that we've been picking up on quite a lot the last 12 to 18 months, that there seems to be a great push around Egypt and Egypt's capabilities as it looks no longer, I think, to establish itself as a European nearshore destination, but rather a global CX and BPO delivery destination.
Yeah, and interestingly, it's seen a 16% improvement over last year in terms of its labor market, that's a big jump. That was the biggest
Huge.
jump in the report this year. So it seems that BPO operators are more than ever very, very confident in the talent that they're able to source in India, and by association, the clients that BPOs are working with.
Yeah, this is it. And there were a couple of other interesting ones that popped up as well in terms of the American nearshore. Colombia and Belize both achieved very strong standings. Now, it's important to recognize that Colombia has historically always done well in our report, but Belize is a new entrant. And I remember when the numbers first started coming in, both you and I were quite taken aback with the extent to which those individuals operating in Belize were very enthusiastic about lauding it and lauding the operating environment, lauding the extent to which it's straightforward in which to deliver BPO services from that Central American country.
Yeah, it was quite a surprise, and it's good to see some new entrants really making a splash.
Yeah.
Especially a country like Belize is relatively small, but for the operators who work there, again, it's just very high confidence in the talent pool that they're able to tap into. And I think that the BPO ecosystem in Belize has been very strong because it's such a small nation and because there aren't that many providers operating there. It's a very close knit community, and they all have this common self interest to drive the industry forward. I think that's really helped to create a lot of confidence in the market this year.
Yeah, and a country that had an equal level of confidence, in fact, it was tied with Belize, was Mexico. Now, obviously, that's not a new country. That's not a new kid on the block, to use a terrible 1990s pop culture reference. But Mexico has probably been, I think, one of the most established delivery points anywhere in the world, and one of the most, probably really one of the most important ones as well. Now, it's a country, Matt, you've had a lot of experience in. You lived in Mexico for a number of years. You've seen the industry up close. You've been able to witness the evolution of Mexican BPO and CX. I was
Mm-hmm.
really quite pleased the extent to which Mexico did move up the rankings, and the extent to which that it's consistently shown itself to be a great operating environment. Notwithstanding, I think we can all agree, perhaps some challenges maybe at the macro level in terms of the political environment. Public security has always been a bit of a perceived challenge, at the very least, in Mexico. But definitely those operating in country feel that not only are they able to get the BPO job done, but they're able to do so in a very quality manner.
Yeah, and again, they if Mexico can do a bit more to establish a more robust and cohesive BPO ecosystem, then there's no reason that it can be just the powerhouse BPO player in the region. Even my time living there, I did recognize and notice that the industry seems to be a bit disparate, and that the companies kind of operate uh, independently of each other, and there's a lot of competition. If they were able to move past that and establish a very robust and collaborative BPO ecosystem, then yeah, Mexico could go very far next year.
I think it can. And you're raising a point here. This is the second time where we've talked about a large major country that's had maybe some challenges around the BPO ecosystem. And I,
Hmm.
I think a lot of people forget, when you look at Mexico, it's geographically not that much smaller than the continental United States. It is a huge country. And the extent to which maybe an operator in Tijuana has the same priorities or the same challenges as one who might be based in Mexico City or Guadalajara, we're talking about two very different animals. And maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe there needs to be more of a regionalization in terms of regional contact center bodies or BPO bodies working with the state governments. But I agree, if there can be more cohesiveness, speaking for the industry, speaking and aligning the industry's requirements from the perspective of all of Mexico and what they need from the government, that would be great. I also think maybe let's be frank, let's put our cards on the table, Matt. You were living in Mexico when the investment body was more or less canceled by the AMLO government, and that's certainly not something that is going to go down well in the eyes of prospective investors, global site selectors, or even clients.
Yeah, exactly. Um, it's a huge blow when they take away that gateway to the world, so to speak. And Pro Mexico was they did well. I engaged with them a few times, and they were very easy to
Outstanding,
talk to, very easy
outstanding.
to access. So it's a shame
Yeah,
that they were taken away. But keeping in that region, if we quickly look at Guatemala,
yeah.
Guatemala has only been in the report for 2 years. It wasn't in it in 2021, but Guatemala has actually made the biggest improvement of all the markets in its overall confidence rating. It jumped 10% this year, from 72% to 82%. And a lot of that is down also to the infrastructure, the labor market, the property market, which seem to be quite strong in Guatemala. Yet the political stability side is something that BPO managers are a little bit concerned about.
Yes, and talking about countries that have had challenges around political stability, Poland is next in our rankings or in our index, and I would just point out that the research that we did for this report, Matt, I think it's very important to mention that this was conducted prior to the recent election in October, where there was a change of government. Now, I don't think it's probably any secret that concerns were raised during our research about the previous government in Poland and some of the directions it was taking, maybe going counter to what some of the EU and the EU directives were, the extent to which that some of the policies were causing some disruption for the BPO industry and the perception Poland had. But certainly, I think from the standpoint of a new government and a new dawn, a new renewed interest in Poland, that this bodes well for a country that's done exceptional in regards to not just recruiting some of the biggest names in the world, but also being able to develop a very strong homegrown industry across the multiple urban centers that Poland is able to boast.
Yeah, that's true. And also is one of the few countries that managed to maintain a very stable confidence rating over the 3 years. There's been barely any change in the rating from year on year since we began the report. So in terms of stability, Poland is a really good European market to look at.
Definitely. And we take a look at a couple of other European markets. Well, actually, one in the same region as Poland. Serbia was also one that improved a lot. Now, if we remember in last year's confidence index, Serbia was ranked, I believe, second or third from the bottom. And this year it's moved up quite significantly. Now, I've had some time to spend in Serbia. I've had the chance to visit with a number of different operators there, and I've been really pleased with what I've seen. No question about the talent. The multilingualism is very solid, as are the mid-level management skills. It's an industry that's based heavily in Belgrade, but the potential to move into some of the secondary cities is also very solid. And in my view, it's definitely positioning itself as a Central European nearshore hub that's got only, I think, the best years ahead of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, and mhm. And then we move on to South Africa, which is, I think, probably one of the more interesting ones in our report. Now, Matt, you'll recall that as we've done this report, South Africa has seen somewhat of an erosion in its level of confidence. I think it's important to recognize that we had more respondents from South Africa than for any other country that was included in the report this year. So we got a very strong level of confidence in terms of the statistical intervals that we were looking for. I don't think there's any question that there is a feeling amongst operators in South Africa that responded to the survey. There's a great deal of confidence in the industry itself, a strong talent pool, great cohesiveness within the industry to speak with one voice, great relations with the government. And the government's been very proactive helping the industry out. Where there was some erosion in confidence this year was at the more macro level. Elements. And I think, Matt, this is something that struck you and I, was the extent to which when it came to political interference in public services, when it came to foreign policy orientation, the ability of the government to manage the economy or publicly owned utilities, tremendous concerns that have popped up in South Africa in 2023.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a really good point to make, is that the industry itself is looking very strong on a confidence level. People who already operate in South Africa are very enthusiastic about the way that the industry is going and their access to talent. And even with things like the power grid failures and things like that, their infrastructure scored pretty highly. Because most operators have backups. They have something that can support them if the power grid fails. But yeah, you're right. On the macroeconomic level, things like political stability and security and economy, people are not too pleased with that at the moment. And as a result, the South Africa's dropped year on year around 8%.
Yeah, exactly. Now, staying in Africa, we've got another new entrant this year, Kenya, which performed, quite frankly, better than I expected, with a confidence rating of 77.4%. Kenya is become very much on the minds of BPO operators and their clients. Some amazing language skills, some great talent, and definitely the government seems poised to be investing in all the infrastructure elements required to grow a burgeoning CX and BPO sector. Matt, as somebody who's looked at different emerging locations, what are your thoughts on Kenya as we look to the 2023 BPO Confidence Index?
So Kenya's biggest strength appears to be its infrastructure, which, as a new entrant to the report and landing itself in the top 6 in the infrastructure category is quite an achievement, alongside countries like the Czech Republic and Poland and India. Kenya's doing very well on that side. Also, I think that from a security perspective, BPO providers feel very secure and safe, and they feel like people who are visiting the country are going to have a great time and be very well looked after. And appears to be a lot of access to labor as well within Kenya. The where it falls back a little bit is in its BPO ecosystem. As quite a burgeoning country to the industry, it's still got a way to go to create that ecosystem that will help to strengthen it even further. But yeah, I think that Kenya has a lot of potential to go far.
Yeah, and we come next to one of the big beasts when it's related to BPO and CX delivery, and that's the Philippines. Now, some people might be surprised in the audience to know that the Philippines didn't perhaps receive a higher confidence rating. And as we can see, it didn't do badly when it comes to property availability and quality. Labor, it did quite well, relatively solid on infrastructure and security, but it did face some challenges around the economy and political stability, which seemed to hold it back this year.
Yeah, that's right. After 2 steady years, 2021 and 2022, Philippines was above 80%. It didn't seem like it had any reason to drop, but this year it's gone down to 77% as a result of the factors you just mentioned. Political and economic stability seem to be an issue this year. So maybe it might be a blip, and maybe next year we'll see that Philippines will return to form.
Well, we certainly hope so. And having spent a lot of time there earlier this year, I know that the Philippines has got a dynamic sector. It's got some dynamic players, and they're really looking to reinvent themselves in terms of BPO 2.0, shall we say, going into 2024. So we'll look forward to that. Now, another new entrant, this one in Central and Eastern Europe, is Kosovo. Now, the confidence rating for Kosovo was 76.5%. Kosovo did relatively well in infrastructure. It did very well when it comes to public security and the economy. Um, the areas that I think maybe let it down a little bit, some issues around the labor market and interestingly enough, the BPO ecosystem. Now, I don't think that anybody should look at this necessarily as a long-term structural problem on that last point when it comes to the BPO ecosystem. It's a relatively new spot where this work is being done. There's a tremendous amount of work that's being done by the players themselves to establish a network within the relevant government bodies as well as with each other to try and form an impactful association. So Kosovo is one I would counsel anybody listening to this webinar to be keeping their eye on to see that it moves up the rankings as we move forward.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I think that any market that shows slightly lower confidence in its BPO ecosystem is more of an opportunity than a problem.
Correct.
If BPO entrants feel like they like the market for its labor, they like it for its infrastructure or any of the other factors, and then there is a BPO ecosystem that's ready to be developed, and new entrants could actually be at the forefront of that, which is an exciting prospect.
I love these opportunities. I love seeing new locations pop up, and Kosovo, I think, has really demonstrated by its individual players who I've had the chance to interact with, there is a will to win there. Now, a country not far from Kosovo that seems to have maintained a steady level of interest amongst BPO investors and their clients is Romania, which didn't fare as well relative to other locations this year with a confidence rating of 76.3. Some concerns have emerged about the state of the economy. Political stability is definitely something that is of worry for many, and certainly again the BPO ecosystem. Now, in the case of Romania, I would say, considering it's such a long time established player in the region, there would be an expectation, I think, Matt, that there would be much more of a cohesiveness within the scope of the industry association or the various bodies representing the industry, as well as the capacity for the industry to speak with one voice. But definitely some worries were raised this year, which accounted for a relatively low rating in Romania.
Yeah, that's right, and it's a similar story in Jamaica, which is if you compare the two, although they're in completely different regions, Romania being a burgeoning, really more of a burgeoning market or a burgeoning nearshore delivery hub, and Jamaica being quite a well-established nearshore delivery hub for the Americas. Um, Jamaica is doing very, very well in terms of its infrastructure, its property, and its labor market, and its ecosystem is strong because of its experience. But the reason it pulled a slightly lower confidence rating is again due to these factors like political stability, security, and economic stability. There appears to be some lack of confidence that the next 12 months look good in those areas for Jamaica.
Yeah, no, it's true. And, having spent, much like yourself, Matt, you've covered the American nearshore for some time, and I have too. I've spent a lot of time in Jamaica. I believe that there are a lot of industry level factors that render this one of the most important and one of the most well established destinations for BPO in the world. But it all comes down to the environment in which the industry is operating. And if there is concern about the economy, I mean, look, the issue about the exchange rate and the devaluation of the currency came up many, many times over the course of discussions that we've had. And these are elements that, while if they're managed properly, can be of an advantage. But the moment you start seeing erraticness or instability, we all know capital doesn't like instability, and it's very easy to find different options. And then we're going to round out the index with Honduras, which was ranked at a level of 74.4%. Now, it had the lowest level of confidence in the study that we did this year. It's interesting because as somebody who's had the chance to visit this country a number of different times, I'm always impressed at the extent to which the labor market is very responsive when it comes to bilingualism, great skills on the ground. But there were definitely some concerns raised about public security, political stability, and the economy. Notwithstanding, I think one of the highest ratings was the property element, and that's that's no small reason due to the extensive investment around business parks that you can find in that country. But Matt, what jumped out at you around Honduras?
Well, most respondents seem very confident that they're able to source talent for the industry. That's clear. But one respondent did point out that the education system and the government could do more to train languages, and that could be a reason for the markedly lower confidence overall. Is that it's difficult to, BPOs have to put extra investment into training their staff in languages and training them in specific skills that maybe the education system isn't providing. So that's what jumped out at me in terms of Honduras. But overall, it's, every single market in the index, it's important not to put them in a ranking, like you said. I think that the confidence level is a good way to measure just how confident people are in their own markets and not really putting it on a global ranking. I think that's detrimental to the industry. So looking at it in a way that everyone has confidence in different areas of the industry, but obviously it's different in every country.
So then, as we round out our discussion before, and Liam, if you want to jump back in, we can finish up with a few last words here. But I think maybe Matt, we could have a quick quick few thoughts from yourself, and I'm happy to jump in. What we're anticipating for 2024 as we undertake this research when we go into the field next year.
Well, much like the AI discussion, I think that next year might be a bit of a singularity, and we don't we don't know what's beyond it. I think that if hopefully we're going to be bringing in more markets, attracting more respondents from different markets, so that we can get a broader worldwide view. I mean, that would be my ambition for next year. How about you?
Look, I think we need to take into account. I heard a podcast today, and this will mean something to Liam when I say what the source of the podcast was. It was the Globe and Mail Decibel, and there was a journalist on who was talking about next year half of the citizens in democratic countries are going to be going to the polls. And I think what we're going to be looking for are some potential disruptions from a political stability standpoint, which will then have a knock-on effect potentially on public security and economics. So stay tuned, because in my view, there are some countries I see tremendous potential to improve their confidence ratings. I also see some that could be very vulnerable next year.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. I would love to be able to, because we have quite a few questions in the Q&A section. So I'll just fire them off and
Sure.
you guys answer them. Marina had the first question here. How does this report contrast with the findings from the previous year's report? Any significant change? So there probably are quite a few changes, but what are the most important changes, the changes that really kind of pop to the top of your head?
I
I
can go
mean,
first on that one, Matt, if you want.
sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, or you can go first.
Well, I mean, the biggest one, as I mentioned before, is Guatemala. Guatemala jumped 10%
Mm.
uh, over last year, which is the biggest change that we've seen in confidence. Normally, it's relatively stable year on year. So something's in the water in Guatemala, I think. And in terms of Colombia as well, Colombia's been in the top three for the last 2 years. Getting the highest ranking last year in 22, but it's been on a steady decline of around 8% over the last 3 years. So we need to be looking at Colombia a bit more and trying to understand why confidence is dropping steadily like that. But how about you? What
Yeah.
did you notice?
So for me, there were a couple of things. I think I was really impressed at the jumps for Egypt and for Serbia. I think that
Mm.
those are the types of things that we're looking to measure. We want to see what the big changes are. And Matt, you've alluded to a couple of them right there. For me, those are a couple of big ones. I think probably the one that garnered the most discussion, if I'm blunt with you, was South Africa, perhaps moving downwards in the rankings. We've talked a little bit about what some of the reasons were, but definitely that erosion of confidence and certainly macro level factors are ones that we've got to keep our eyes on in 2024. And we certainly know that operators and their clients are definitely watching those elements, those categories very, very closely.
Yeah, so just to even comment on Egypt, which I did do a trip to about a year and a half ago. I remember speaking to one BPO there, and CC, who controls the government at this point, they were very happy about CC controlling the government. And essentially, they're saying, we want stability more than democracy, because that's really good for business, which I thought was an interesting perspective, at least coming from a democratically minded country. It was a very interesting counterposition to, oh, okay, yeah, stability is actually more important than democracy to them. Hopefully, CC is not listening to this. If he is, I apologize. Next question from an anonymous individual. What are the most significant challenges and opportunities identified globally this year based off your report?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I mean, we could spend an hour talking just about that. But for me, and I'm sure Matt has got his own views, and we'll make them very clear in just a second. But for me, I think the ability, going back to what you were saying, Liam, to provide that stable macro level operating environment is going to be very important. Look, the reality is every country is different. Every country's got its own challenges, but we all know that investors like stability. We all know that they want to go somewhere that they can count on, that they're going to be able to not have to deal with too many issues around transportation or electricity reliability. They want to make sure there's a people are able to get to work on time. They want to be able to get in and out of the country, and they want to have very limited disruption when it comes to changes, significant swings in macroeconomic policy. And Matt related to Colombia and some of the shifts there. We're hearing already concerns about the extent to which there's been too many big swings in policy when it comes to issues such as taxation or spending, etc. So I think being able to maintain that level of stability is going to be probably the biggest challenge. The biggest opportunity is, I think, just getting the word out there for some of these emerging markets like we talked about, such as Kosovo, making sure that the buying community and the BPO community knows that they have alternatives. It's not just two or three big countries that have always sort of been on the map. There's a lot of different ones to choose from, and making sure that an industry in a country like Kosovo speaks with a united voice, that they've got a strong national brand, and that they work effectively with public administration to get the word out to the rest of the world. That's going to be the opportunity.
Yeah, and I would add to that just saying that there's a huge opportunity for new BPO entrants to head into these emerging markets and generate an amazing new BPO ecosystem to bring companies together, to connect with the government and create an ecosystem that is yet to exist or yet to make an impact. I think in places like Kosovo, Kenya, the Czech Republic as well, which is is a very strong European country for BPO right now, is lacking in its BPO ecosystem. And I think that could be seen as a challenge or an opportunity, but I like to put a positive spin and say that that's an opportunity to get in there and improve it. In terms of challenges across the board globally, there appears to be a difficulty in integrating foreign talent, in bringing in people from other countries and getting them into work in the industry. And that's usually down to very just a lot of red tape around visa processing, things like that. So it's difficult to manage that. But with the remote ecosystem we live in today, I think that maybe some of these markets could turn that challenge into an opportunity by employing in different places. They don't have to stick to their own countries anymore. So that could be a workaround for the foreign talent integration problems.
Great points. Next question that we have here from Dave is, if you were setting up today, would you go with Guatemala, or is there a more cost-effective option? And I think probably, because he's talking about Guatemala, we're probably talking about Central and South America, realistically.
So I think Guatemala is a great option, but it all comes down to what Dave or anybody else would be looking for. Are they looking for what is their rapport between cost and quality? And the reality is Guatemala is probably one of the more cost-effective locations in the world. It's certainly not the cheapest, and you can source some great talent on there. But if you're looking for higher value work, if you're looking for work that's going to be more sensitive in terms of what end users require, I would say that you would not necessarily be looking for the most cost-effective location. You can get cheaper than Guatemala, but I would just stress it's one of those how long is a piece of string questions. What exactly would you be looking to service from the country?
Got it.
Yeah, there's no better answer I can give than what Peter's just said, so we'll go with that.
I wished I'd heard that in my university and high school days, but whatever.
Right. All right. Next question we have from someone else who's decided to be anonymous is, what is the influence of local labor market conditions on the BPO industry in Mexico? I think someone's quite interested in checking out the local environment in Mexico. So the influence of the local labor market conditions on the BPO industry.
Matt, over to you. You lived in Mexico a long time.
Yeah, I'm just checking out now. I mean, this is a great time to say, well, go and check out the report. It's all there. You can find that out for yourself. But to comment on that as well, the BPO market in Mexico is still a powerhouse. There's no question. It's a huge market. There's plenty of talent. having lived there myself, it's absolutely full of highly educated, intelligent, driven, passionate people, and at every level of the entire country. I would have no. I would always recommend that we look at Mexico to set up shop or to find talent, because it's just a wealth of talent there. In terms of the findings of the report, every single element of frontline agents, from supervisors, leadership, voice, non-voice, customer care, all of these things receive glowing endorsements above 90%. So you're going to be able to find anything that you need in Mexico. It only lags really on some of the more specialized services like content moderation, and some of the education system's ability to train people for the industry. But that also comes down to the ecosystem not being as strong as it could be, because companies could be lobbying the government and lobbying education institutes to do better in that realm. But I would say that if you're looking for a good market in Latin America, Mexico is up there.
Got it. I always say, Liam, it was like with nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Nobody ever got fired for going into Mexico. I couldn't reiterate more what Matt has just said. And, going back to what we were saying with regards to Pro Mexico getting canned a few years ago, one of the things I think we should point out is the extent to which that the state governments have really picked the ball up and are encouraging aggressively and dynamically investment to come into their different jurisdictions, and are really doing a great job on that too. So 100% endorsement. Mexico is always going to be a great option.
Okay, very interesting. We've only got 2 questions left. Mariana, who is asking, what trend lines are you seeing that are bad news for the BPO industry in 2024? Bad news,
So,
like let's say maybe top 3 bad things that are going to
top
happen.
3. Okay, I think there's a few things that we should point out here. Number one, I think that what could be bad news is if we start seeing enterprise contact center budgets increasing. When enterprises start seeing their budgets grow, they're less likely to look to try and work with contact center outsourcing providers or BPO providers. That's number one. Now, at this point, I'd say it's 50-50. There's a lot of recessionary talk in the air. When recessionary talk happens, that's when CX budgets start to get slashed. So let's watch out for that. I think as a second point I would make before I pass over to Matt is I would be very concerned, and I don't want to get political here, but more protectionist elements that perhaps take hold in different governments around the world that prevent the extent to which a buyer might be able to leverage a nearshore or offshore location. That might be some bad news for the outsourcing community as well.
Yeah, not much to add there. I think just observations from the report that BPO executives feel almost unilaterally that the political and economic stability over the next year is going to be a challenge. And that just seems to be a global trend overall. And I think that reflects that.
It's just to comment on that as well. Everyone feels that, and yet the economy is still going up. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I feel like when this does pop, it's going to be huge. That's probably a podcast or a webinar for another day. Dave has the last question here. Is infrastructure, internet connectivity, still a big problem globally? And I think maybe that was your comment talking about how you've really started to see internet connectivity. I think it was also the comment in India has gone up significantly. Is this a big problem at this point? Is this something that we really need to continue to address? Or are there still countries today where infrastructure issues are a significant calculation that you need to make inside of setting up a BPO location, or even just hiring a few people if you're doing it remotely?
Matt, what are your thoughts?
I mean, just based on the findings of the report and from my experience, I think the infrastructure is always improving across the board. There are some areas where you're going to find pockets of difficulty to get connectivity, but the infrastructure is one of the highest scoring categories in the report this year.
Right.
Almost half or over half of the country scored over 90% with infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. Digital connectivity was usually the strongest point within that category. So yeah, I would think that like any technology, it's just going to keep improving, and the countries are aware that it's a necessary thing, and they're working on it.
Interesting.
Liam, I think I would echo what Matt said, and from my own perspective, as somebody who's been looking at this as a category the last while, well, the last 20 years, for different offshore locations, the improvements that we see, even in some of the countries that perhaps have more developmental challenges, when it comes to digital connectivity, governments realize if you don't have this, you're not going to have an economy going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Liam, you and I live in Quebec, and we're probably subjected to news reports in more remote parts of the province where people have challenges. So is everywhere pervasive to 100% robustness? No, probably not. But that's not just in the offshore and the nearshore. We get it in countries like Canada as well.
Got it. Oh, really interesting stuff. Well, Peter and Matt, really appreciate you coming out and educating all of us. For people that want to be able to learn more, where should they go?
Matt, where should they go?
Well, they have the benefit of choice, I guess. They can go to my
I was going to
website
say
or
they have the
Peter's
benefit of
website.
choice.
If they want to find
Okay.
it on my website, it's cognitivecopy.com/research.
Cognitivecopy.com. Hopefully we can put that down. And there we go. See, it just magically appeared in the chat. We have a magic AI named Vaishali that does those things automatically
Yeah,
for us.
awesome.
Excellent. And if they want to check it out on my site, it's ryanadvisory.com/latest research.
You might as well check out both. Why not?
Yeah,
Right?
they both go to the same
Why
place.
not?
There we
They both go
go.
to the same place, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Which
thank
gets
you
you
very
there
much.
faster.
This was great. And again, if anyone wants to get more information on either of Ryan Advisory or Cognitive Copy, go check out their websites. I think it's great to be able to really get some up-to-date data and also just longitudinal data, which is so rare. A lot of the times you just get these singular reports, these studies done, but it's interesting to be able to see the changes that are currently happening. So it was great to chat with both of you. Other than that, thank you very much for taking the time. And we always do stuff like this at Time Doctor, so we'll have a lot more content coming out soon. So check your inboxes. Other than that, see you guys in the next one.
Thanks very much. Take it
Yeah,
easy.
thanks for having us on, Liam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.